Welcome to Global Citizen Life Podcast. Today on the show, we have Sonny Moyers. Sonny, thank you very much for your time today and for joining us.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here and visit with you. Hopefully, I can help your audience and provide great value and benefit to them.
Absolutely. I think there's, so many things that I want to talk about. You have a background in psychology and a background in real estate, and real estate being the stronger one of the two, more recent.
Yeah, I think that I've used the psychology part of my career very much in all activities that I've done. So it's pretty hard to separate the two because the way I ran my real estate firm was very much based on psychological concepts like self-disclosure and reciprocity, written
Mm,
about a great deal by Sidney Girard. Communications theories, psychology, why people think. I love to study people. I love to look at
right.
people. People talk about people watching. I like to watch
I
people
love
and
to do
watch
that.
behavior and kind of examine and without talking to them necessarily, what are they saying without talking sometimes. And certainly,
Right.
if you believe in the idea of the subconscious thinking, I believe a lot in psychology that people form opinions based upon visual connect, and that sometimes is formed within the first 2 to 10 seconds. So I suspect that we both formed an opinion very quickly when we first started talking.
Definitely. I think it's very interesting that way. I remember now it was quite some time ago, and I don't know who did the study, but they had people and they just showed a picture of a person for a couple of seconds and they asked them like if they thought that they were a good person or a bad person.
Mhm.
And it was just that instant um and it was interesting how they were judged with about I think it was around 80% accuracy
Yeah, yeah.
of so obviously the bad people had done bad things. And it was just very interesting that within those first few seconds of just even a photo, not even
Mhm.
an actual physical encounter where you get more of that energy and feeling from someone.
Yeah, that ties in directly with one of the concepts I wouldn't mind visiting with you about. You've always heard most people, by the way, I've taught worldwide. So I've taught in 20 different countries and done numerous lectures and presentations there. And I found that the audiences, when it comes to human behavioral theory, psychology, and interpersonal communications theory, they're very similar, not so dissimilar. And so, for example, almost everyone around the world has heard the statement, always make a good first impression. And I've asked audiences all over the world, did you hear that? And they all almost to a person said, yes, I heard that from a parent, a family member, someone who was an influencer. And what they didn't necessarily say is that people psychologically support their first impressions. So in your discussion about the picture, people innately with internally, when they see a picture, size them up and when in a matter of 2 to 10 seconds, form an opinion about that person. And then they seek to support that opinion with what they see
Ah,
after that. So, for example, in real estate, you've often heard the term curb appeal. Okay.
hmm.
So, in looking at your screen, I formed an impression immediately of how neatly and tidy your background was and how
Hmm.
you live very well. Okay. Now, I would look psychologically, I would look to support that first impression. However, if I looked at that first background and if that background had been negative, if it had been sloppy, if it had been stacked with books everywhere and not well kept, I would psychologically support that first impression. And one of the biggest things about curb appeal is in real estate is that when you drive up to a home, the client within 2 to 10 seconds forms an opinion of that home based on what they see at that moment. And when they open the
Right.
door to walk in the door, They look for things that psychologically support that first impression. If they see a very unkept front yard and a very unfinished front door, things that are wrong with the home or landscape, whatever. Then when they walk in the home, they're likely to continue that negative perception and look for things that support that negative first impression. So psychologically, one of the things you want to do, in whether it's in first appearances or whether it's in real estate or any other professional services business, that first impression is so vital and the second impression becomes vital because it supports that first impression. So when you walk into someone's office and you meet them and there's an eye contact and a firm handshake and a big smile, that starts the ball on a positive note. If they walk into a restaurant or a business establishment and they get a negative first impression, they have to wait, whatever, they will look for things that support that negative first impression. So you've only got about 10 seconds to make a positive first impression. And it can be very damaging if your first impression is negative, because people will look for things that support that. They can't help but do that. So psychology-wise, when people prepare properly for an interview or a meeting, it's not just that they're attractive or unattractive. It's not just that they're smart or not smart. It has to do with what the perception is of that. Now, not only do they think about what they visibly see consciously, but subconsciously, and some would say in their unconscious mind, they form opinions. They may knowingly form that opinion, or they may unknowingly form that opinion. And that unconscious mind is a very important part in understanding people, because the unconscious rises to the subconscious and to the conscious level. And when it becomes conscious, opinion is formed. So even though the mind sees things, and unconsciously you're forming opinions, such as I did about your background, okay? And that unconsciously, I might not have even thought that initially, but it's there. And then it rises to the conscious level, and then I see it and recognize it and know it for what it is. So I think what a lot of people don't realize is how important what's going on around them is to someone. So when you walk into a meeting, from the minute you talk to them, see them, or their picture, you're forming opinions, good or bad, sometimes neutral, but everything will happen. I don't quite know yet what I think, but when I see it, it will tip me one way or the other.
Find it interesting too when we're unsure, right? We're like they seem nice, they seem polite, but there's something, I can't put my finger on it, or I can't put my thumb on it, as the saying goes, but something's just off.
Well, and that also has to do with personality type and behavior of the individual. Some people who are highly analytical, they might have a withhold and fight down the opinion subconsciously or unconsciously until they see more, and then they form an opinion. So when you meet someone and you have the reaction of, I'm not certain about this person, that's negative. Whether you think it's negative or not, if you're not certain about a person when you first meet them, it's probably negative. Okay?
Right.
Because not being positive is in fact in itself negative. Now, if the behavior, can you change that behavior? Of course, you can change it. You can change that opinion by demonstrating things that are highly positive to the person viewing you or what you're doing, and can turn it positive, but it's difficult. So I've had many a client who in a presentation said to me this exact words. They would say, Sonny, I had my mind made up before you came in of what I was going to do, but you've made this very difficult for me. And my response is always, I'm sorry that I've made it difficult for you, but what is it that I can say or do or answer questions that would make it easier for you? And
Right.
typically in residential real estate, I did commercial and residential, which is a little unusual in itself, but they might say, well, I have a family member who's in real estate. I have a person who goes to the same church that I attend who's in
Mhm.
real estate. And I had thought that I was going to give them the opportunity to help me. And now, because of your skill sets and your perception of what you've demonstrated so far, I'm having a difficult choice here because I'm pulled because of friendship one way or family one way or the other. So that's where I'm
Right.
having my dilemma. And so my question would be, Sally, if we were playing this in a role play,
Mhm.
let me ask you this. If this friend or family member does a poor job, would you be willing to fire them?
Well, hopefully. I mean, it's tough, but they would have to. I mean, it's a
Well, there could go
job.
your
If they're not
friendship,
doing a
or
good job,
there could go your friendship with that person. So I would simply say to you, Sally, if you're going to choose someone as a family member or realtor, you put at risk the relationship. Do you want to do that? So here's
right.
what I would suggest to you. And again, role playing. You need to
Mhm.
make the best decision without regard to the relationship based upon all points of detail or fact that you can see. And yeah, I think you mentioned in either our prior discussion before we started or at the beginning that you form opinions, and in this case you take data that the
Mhm.
mind absorbs, and when you get multiple points of data, the mind can extrapolate without you knowing it and form an opinion based upon that data. And that opinion is hugely right. The story
Right.
that's best applied is in a story by Malcolm Gladwell in one of his books.
Mhm.
And it's basically, if you've read Malcolm Gladwell, he's one of my favorite authors.
Yes.
But if you
Yeah,
read
he's
him,
great.
the story is that these doctors, you walk in to see a physician about a medical problem, and they string together multiple points of data. And that data might be, here's how I feel, here's what I think, here's how I look. Some of those are verbal and some are not. Uh, but based on multiple points of data, they quickly form an opinion. This can be
Mm.
called data slicing, is what Gladwell calls it. Now, when they form that opinion based upon 5 or 6 points of data, how often are they right? A very high percentage of the time,
Right.
because they've seen so much. A physician who's been in the profession for years has seen someone with these symptoms, this reaction, and when they form that opinion, well, they did a study to determine if the doctors were right or not, because they said, well, if the doctor's first opinion is correct 80 to 90% of the time, then why do all these tests that we run people through endlessly in the hospital, spending a fortune on medical tests, insurance companies covering most of that cost? But why do we do all these tests if our first opinion is 80 or 90% of the times right? Well, it's very simple. If you're the person who doesn't exhibit the same data points and you happen to be the one that dies, then there's a whole lot of
Right.
lawsuits to follow. So
Right.
you're slicing data, taking a few data points. So here's the basic concept, and I hope I'm not running on. If I am, just
No,
tell me.
no, it's
But
no, it's good.
if you put together 3 or 4 data points,
Mhm.
and there's a very high percentage of you being right, most of the time, most of the people that you form an opinion about, you're going to be dead on. Which is why
Right.
when someone says, I'm not sure, they don't have enough data to form an opinion. And that opinion will form very quickly, even if they don't have it in the initial seconds. Because the first words out of someone's mouth, once you meet them, could
Oh,
cause
yeah.
be one way or the other. You know,
And I've met people on both sides that I met, and at first it's good impression, and then they start talking, and I just think, "Oh, please stop talking. Please, please, please." And the other, it's kind of like, "Oh, yeah, they're, again, okay." And then through conversation, knowledgeable and interesting and everything.
Uh,
And it's like, oh wow, my opinion went from that kind of neutral-ish
yeah.
area in some cases to a negative, and in other cases to a positive.
Let me give you a case study of an example of this. Okay. We had a couple that owned a very expensive home in the DFW area. This was a several $1 million home in Dallas Fort Worth area. That's a marvelous home. Some people would call it a castle. Um,
Okay.
and they were going through a divorce. And the wife contacted us and said, I'd like to meet with you about selling our home. And Judy, my partner and wife, and I went over together, and we met with the wife who was living in the home,
Mhm.
and hit it off pretty well. But when we went back for the interview, the presentation, her estranged spouse was there. Now,
Okay.
picture a formal dining room with a table that seats maybe 12. And the wife and Judy and I were sitting at one end. And when the gentleman came in, he sat at the far end of the table and the furthest point away from us, because
Okay.
he had already formed a negative opinion because she chose the realtor. And since they
Right.
were
Her
estranged,
choice, so
she
it's not going
already
to be
had a
good
very,
because they have that negative.
but we had a very negative first impression of him because he sat at the far end of the table. And for 20 or 30 minutes, he did not utter one word. He did not blink an eye. And that's why we nicknamed him Poker Face. Okay.
That's a good
Now,
nickname. You probably could have come up with some worse ones. So,
yeah. But through the entire presentation, he did not say one word, didn't blink. He was very reserved and standoffish. And we got
mhm.
to a certain point of the interview, and he said, I have one question. And we were shocked that he had a question. He said, if I go along with this, meaning she's driving this process, if I go along with this, are you going to tell me everything you tell her? That was a clear signal of distrust.
Mm.
Okay. So my response to him was, Mr. So and so, whatever we tell your wife, your spouse, we're going to tell you. The divorce wasn't yet final. So whatever we tell her, we're going to tell you. We've worked with clients who are going through this like you are. I can promise you we'll be fair to both of you. We'll be open to both of you. We'll tell everything to each of you that we would say to the other. He said, fine. We moved forward. We sold the home. Later, we had a chance to meet with him when he decided he needed to buy a home to live in, and he called us.
Wow.
And we found out that he was not poker face at all. The situation made him that way. That wasn't
Right.
him. And so
Right.
when you have to be very careful in life and business by forming a first impression and without looking at enough data points to verify it. So, for
Mm.
example, you go on a first date with someone, and your first reaction is, "Oh, these are a wonderful human being. He or she is fantastic," and you only have 6 data points. But if you had 20
Mm.
data points, you would form a different opinion, maybe. So
Right. Well,
these we have to be cautious of our first impressions, but we also have to be aware of them and honor them in the sense that we trust that they are probably correct if you have enough data points.
right. And it's knowing too of, I mean, that's, and it makes sense because as we meet people and get to know them, and that dating is a perfect example of you meet somebody and how many times do people go on 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 12 or more dates.
Yeah.
And at some point, whatever it is, they say, this just isn't working
Yeah. Yeah.
for
I
a
mean, if you don't
variety of
know,
reasons, but because you're getting more of those data points, you're getting to know them more as a person than just anybody could be great for a few hours on a date.
for sure. And that's if you think about it this way, Gerard, this psychologist, psychotherapist that I spoke about, who wrote a lot of material on self-disclosure reciprocity, proffered the idea of the theory of the mask, that every human being wears a mask. Okay. Now
Mm-hmm.
that mask can be very thin or it can be very thick. People who are highly analytical tend to have a much thicker mask. People who are very expressive, as I am, have a very thin mask. I assessed within the first 10 seconds that you're pretty expressive and that you don't have much of a mask on. Okay.
No.
You're not hiding a lot. Okay. You're pretty open. Okay. That was my
Yes.
assessment. Whether that's true or not, I have to have more data points to prove it. But
Mm.
so far, I would say it's pretty sure accurate. All right. Now, his theory of the mask was that people have this mask up. And in teaching and lecturing all over the world, I found that certain cultures have a thicker mask than other cultures in general. Not everybody, but in general.
Mhm.
So working in Germany, I found that people were much more reserved early and only opened up after a while. Okay. And working in some other
Okay.
countries, I found that it was almost immediately they would remove the mask. Okay. So the theory of the mask is basically that everybody wears a mask. So when two people meet for the first time on a date, for example, they both have a mask on. And that mask hides the reality of who that person is. And only
Mhm.
after a little bit of a while does the mask come down enough for us to see the real person. So if you've ever heard the idea or the statement that people buy from people they know and like,
Mhm.
that's exactly the case. If you know and like someone, you tend to trust them more.
Right.
And if you don't know them, and you keep your mask up. So Girard's
Right.
concept, self-disclosure reciprocity, was a concept that I wrote my master's thesis on, and has been a significant factor in my entire life as far as teaching, working, business, etc. And it's a very essentially that when one person discloses to another, uh, it almost demands a reciprocal disclosure of a similar kind.
Mm.
So if someone discloses to someone, they're probably going to reciprocate with a similar disclosure, like where are you coming from, Montenegro, for example, or where are you coming from,
Mm.
Dallas, Fort Worth area, for example. That elicits the similar disclosure. And if a disclosure is, I have a puppy, I have a cat, I have a pet, and you might respond with, oh, I have a cat or I have a pet also. And so that removal of the mask is directly related to the self-disclosure reciprocity concept. And that's where Girard tied this to treatment of patients, in that if a psychotherapist is willing to disclose things about themselves, that will elicit a better response in the patient opening up and disclosing things about themselves. And that's the concept of self-disclosure reciprocity in the therapeutic environment. So while I'm not a psychologist in the therapy side of it, my studies of human behavioral theory and psychology apply in almost everything uh, dealing with people, interpersonal communications theory. So,
Absolutely. I do agree. It is, as you said, dealing with it with everything, any type of service, any type of friendship, any even relationships to your kid's teacher when you go to parent teacher
yeah,
interviews and get to know them, and any type of business deal that we're doing. And also for people that are looking to move abroad, it's
yeah,
what is that culture like? What are those people like? How am I going to make friends? And it's all the impression that we get from them, as a country, as a city, as an individual, as how business works, kind of how where are they with religion? Is it a very religious place, not religious? What type of a bunch of different ones? Like all of those things come in
mhm,
to make us feel comfortable and
mhm,
confident or not so much.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I think the the concept of a parent-teacher meeting, for example,
Mhm.
the parent goes into a meeting with their defenses up, don't they? They have
Yes.
their defenses up, putting up this mask. I apologize for some of the noise going on in the background, but
I
uh,
can't hear anything.
people knocking on the door.
Oh.
So the idea that you have the person comes in that you're going to criticize or discuss their child, and you might
Mm.
give negative information, they're in a protection mode and a defensive mode. So probably the worst
Mhm.
thing a teacher could do is say, well, let's talk about the problems that Danny is having. Because boy, that's going to get the parents really defensive, right? And so
Right.
you have to, and the same thing is true when you're doing an interview with a team member and you've got some critical comments to make about their performance. So when you have a parent come in with this defensive mask on, you have to, and the same thing is true when you're interviewing an employee, giving corrective discussion, critical comments. You better start out positive.
Mm.
Because if you start out negative, you're not going to make much progress. And then
Right.
you go through, for example, and giving an assessment or evaluation of a team member, you might start out with, here's two or three things that you do really well. And I'm really pleased with this. And then, well, there's a couple of things that I would like to visit with you about, team member, that you could improve on. Not that
Mm.
you're doing it wrong, but you could improve on. And then, so the fundamental rule of doing evaluations is, this goes back from my management theory and concepts. Start on a high note, cover the tough
Right.
issues, and end on a high note.
Mhm.
So, team member, you're a valued team member, and we appreciate everything you're doing. And I think that if you could just work in these areas to improve, wow, we're going to be very, very pleased with your performance. So that's example of the mask and the whole theory of defensive. So when people walk in with a very thick mask on, which is what Poker Face had on, right? He had
Right.
on a significantly thick mask because he didn't trust us, he didn't know us. And self-disclosure reciprocity is basically that when the other person sees you, they don't know what you might think, they don't know what you might say,
Right.
and therefore they remain defensive.
Oh.
Okay. So until they feel comfortable with you. So one of the roles of almost anyone in any business environment is to make the other party feel comfortable. Remove the mask, allow
Right.
them to see you and like you. And since we all agree almost universally around the world, people buy from people they know and like, then that's your
Mhm.
best starting point.
So why is it, generally speaking, when we are unsure about someone, an individual, a product, a service, a business, um, a move, does the brain and mind generally, even though it might be something that we want, it goes to the negative? The what if it's not the right person? What if this other brand is better? What if I move there and I don't like it? Or, all of these what if negative
Yeah.
things that, and I even do it myself. I catch myself and I just stop thinking negative because the brain just goes to that. What if it's, I guess, negative, or what if things end up being worse than they are now? Again,
Yeah.
and again, it's that negative thought.
Well, let's start out with a couple of things. One is cognitive dissonance. Okay.
Hmm.
Even when you're sure of something and you go to buy an automobile or a piece of furniture, okay, let's use a piece of furniture, for example, a beautiful chair. And you go to the showroom and you get caught up in it and you go, oh, this is beautiful. This is perfect. Then you have it delivered to your home. And as soon as you walk out the store, you start thinking, oh, I hope the colors are right. I hope it
Yeah.
fits. The scale is right. I hope someone likes it, family member, whoever. How will it look? So the
Yeah.
brain is automatically starting to build up, oh, concerns, concerns, concerns. Okay. So even though you visited Italy and you were in Rome and you said, or Roma, and you said, oh, this is fabulous. I think I'd like to live here. You have certain data points that you've accumulated based upon a visit to a wonderful hotel. You went to all these great
Right.
restaurants. So in our case, Judy and I went to Paris numerous times. We were in Paris 5 or 6 times in our lives, sometimes for a week or 10 days. And we formed opinions about France and Paris.
Mhm.
And then we went on a trip and we booked an apartment in a typical building. And we stayed there for a week. And it was horrible. Everything about it was horrible because the children screaming in the courtyard, it was different than the luxury hotel we were in.
And you
And
hear
so,
the neighbors and the walls are thinner and yeah,
so here's
I
the
can get it.
this,
Yeah.
this ties into our entire discussion. You've heard all these things about this wonderful country, and you've had a certain number of data points. And these data points tell you positive, positive, positive. But you only have data points in a certain environment, in a certain way.
Hmm.
You're in a luxury hotel. You're going out to eat every night. You're not dealing with life structures and stresses and all that. Okay. So
Right.
the ideal thing, if you're going to think about moving to a different country, is not only to have visited there, but have stayed there in a working, living environment so that you know what
Hmm.
life is really like, not this pretend world of being a visitor or a tourist or whatever. So, and the reason is you don't have enough data points. You only have data points in a certain restricted, it's like doing a study, and you do a study with possible 5 or 6 points to look at. But if you had 20 points to look at, the study would have a different reaction, which is why I'm always hesitant when I hear one of the sections I studied in was research methodologies in my master's work. And basically is how many points of data, what are you trying to rule out, what are you trying to count, et cetera. Well, when you only have 5 data points about something this big and you only study it in this
Hmm.
environment, you're likely to get a wrong read. And when you hear someone, this study suggests that this is the case, that's trouble.
Right.
Anytime when someone says this study suggests, we hear it on the news a lot. There's a new
Hmm.
study out by University of California, blah, blah, blah. And it suggests your warning signal should go up in your head. I don't
Yeah,
see the
that should be just
study. I
red
don't know the
flags.
details. I don't know the situation. I don't know the scope of the study. I don't know anything about how many respondents there were. And I formed an opinion based upon this study. That's what that news person is saying, or someone behind them who told them to say that.
Hmm. And it is important. I mean, especially, like as we talk about your Paris experience and I agree with that. Staying in a hotel, being on vacation anywhere is not the same as living anywhere because when we're on vacation, as you said, like things just don't matter. We don't have schedules, we don't have appointments, we don't have meetings, we don't care if the public transportation's late. Sure, it's a little annoying if there's a strike, but we're on vacation, so again, it doesn't really
I've
matter.
been through that
And
too.
where are
Yeah.
we staying? We're staying in, the luxury hotel, which is not the same as the can be very nice, but unless it's a recently renovated apartment where the walls are thin, it's not insulated. It may have heat, but it might not be warm heat like we're
Yeah.
used to in North America, or no AC. And because of the buildings, a lot of places I've seen, they say, well, we have a ceiling fan, but don't use it because the neighbor upstairs complains. So
Yeah.
you have it and it's there, but you can't really use it because I don't know, I guess the sound or the noise. And that's honestly living in Europe, and I've been in Europe for many years, and those are a lot of the things. I mean,
Yeah.
I can sometimes hear my neighbors or they're trying to plug something in the wall and they're just, you can hear them having troubles finding the plug in to plug it in and just thinking, just get the plug in already.
Yeah. Let me go further on that story about France. Uh, at the time, being there for that week, we were unhappy.
Yeah.
Would I still move to France? Absolutely. But I would have a different set of what our requirements would be if I lived in
Hmm.
France for a year or 2 years. Okay. I would love to do that.
Right.
Being in Paris for a
Hmm.
year would be marvelous, or 2 years would be marvelous. I'd probably be ready to come home, but most people often are. But my point on
Yeah.
this is that the data points I had didn't fit the set of what I was looking at. I was comparing it to this life that you and I just discussed, a hotel, wonderful restaurants, everybody taking care of you, no problems.
Mm.
You're laid back, you're
Right.
relaxed, you've had enough wine to keep you comfortable. Then all that works out great. But when you put
Right.
yourself in a real life, so if you move to a country, you need, in my mind, to have enough data points to know
Hmm.
not just that you're going to move there, but what are the requirements if I move there.
Right.
And so, if I lived in um, Germany. Certainly, I visited one of my clients' homes in Germany, and it was very small compared to what
Mhm.
I was used to. Everything about it, the stove was this little bitty stove, and the refrigerator was this little bitty refrigerator. So
Yep.
I learned a whole lot by visiting that home. That's more data points. So if I moved to Germany, I
Right.
would expect everything to be smaller.
I always recommend to people if they're going to be moving, especially like it is a little bit different when it's one person because when it's just me and I'm moving because I'm single and I've moved to different places myself, then it's easy for me because it's just me. And if I'm not happy, my fault, then it's easy for me to move on or find something different. So it's very easy. But when you have a partner, spouse, it's harder. It's harder because there's more things to think about and consider and compromise on because each person has their own expectations or requirements, and then obviously if you have kids then there's even more things to
Yeah.
consider with that. But I say especially with coming to Europe that we're allowed 90 out of every 180 days to be in Europe. Come for a solid 90 days, be in whichever country, city, even if you're kind of thinking, oh, well, I want to be in France, but I'm not sure if I want to be in Paris, Bordeaux, or Nice. And I would say spend 1 month in each location so you get a feel for what it's like in each location and then
Mhm.
decide from there because then at least and I mean, even a month is not really a long time, but it's much better than a week, 10 days, 2 weeks somewhere thinking, oh, I love it here. I want to move. And I always say to people, I'm like, just wait. Like, and
You need more
because I
data
get it
points. Yeah.
because I've moved a lot and it's always wonderful and great when you're first there. And then I find after, depending upon where you're at, about 6 months, sometimes, give or take for different people, but all that newness is worn off.
Yeah.
And it's great. The
Well, let's add it.
Colosseum is beautiful, but when you walk by it 100 times and there's so many people and you're trying to get somewhere, you don't really care about the Colosseum that much anymore.
Right? I agree with you. And let's take another dimension to this. When you add a couple or a couple and a child, okay, or a significant person in their lives, like a parent, okay.
Mm,
Now, each of those people, and this goes back to the psychology a little bit in Maslow's theory of need, wants, motivation, okay. Uh, and there's different stages, okay. Well, the chances that all three of those people would be at the same stage in their lives is almost impossible. It could happen,
right,
but it's very rare. So maybe
right.
the one of the party is at the stage of self-actualization. They're done
Mm,
with wanting to gather property, goods. They just want to have things that make them happy. Okay.
right.
Another one may be still in the acquisition of I need something. And the other one may be I'm at the end of my life, it's a parent or something toward the latter part of my life. And
Hmm.
my needs and my wants aren't as important as the people I have around me. So you have
Right.
three different sets of people with different needs and wants. And so one of the most important things with a real estate agent, uh, someone who's helping people, including
Hmm.
those who are advising people about moving to a foreign country, for example, would be to
Hmm.
know where they are in this stage of development and what their hot buttons are as far as needs. Because the chance that you can get it right and all three will be the same and be happy is pretty small.
I say it's almost impossible.
So if you get to that other
It,
country and you live there for 6 months and your spouse is miserable and you're loving it, that's not a good situation to
yeah,
be in. Yeah,
no.
yeah,
And that really is a tough one, especially for people who move because of one person's job.
for
So
sure.
one person gets transferred and the other one could be still great on board, it's good, but the one who has the job has automatic friends, colleagues from work, knows people, and the other one who maybe gave up their job or it's a harder transition for the one who I don't want to say they're following, but the one who's going along with because they then need to make their own friends. And the other one, oh, it's Friday. I'm just going to go for a couple drinks after work, have a glass of wine with the colleagues. And the other one's like, I still don't know people here. Right? And
Yeah.
it's harder and takes longer for that other person to adjust and make friends, and it's very difficult.
Yeah, let me tell you a quick story about France. I think you'll enjoy. If I'm Unless I'm going too long, tell me if
Yeah.
I am.
No, no, it's all
Uh,
good.
the first time we went to Paris, we had heard all the things you hear in America about going to France. Okay. And we had some defenses built up. Okay. We
Mhm.
went into this wonderful little restaurant and it was off the beaten path. It wasn't the typical tourist restaurant. There were very few people in the restaurant that spoke English, and we did not speak French. And when we first were seated, the attendant came over, the server came over, and demonstrated a very negative attitude toward us. Okay.
Okay.
It was very unpleasant, and we both sensed it. When she left for a minute, I said, Judy, let's turn her around. Let's make her like us.
Mhm.
And so when she came back, we tried to read the menu and pronounce the words, and she laughed. And when I asked her to select the wine for our meal, she was complimented. By the end of the evening, we were great friends.
Yeah.
And that tells you you form opinions, but you
Mhm.
don't really know. And so you have to be willing to bend. So I've always said to friends and associates who were going to France, when you go to France, pack your ego of America at home and leave it, and go there and be French. Go there
Right.
and just invite participation from the people that are there with you, whether it's entertainment, the hotel, or whatever. And we've been back numerous times and we've loved it every time, except that one experience with the apartment, which we weren't prepared for because we didn't have enough data points. So,
Right.
but if I could
Right.
go to Tuscany right now, that'd be a great place for me to go.
Yeah, I
I'm a little
love
bit older,
Italy.
so I don't need the nightlife and the five-star restaurants anymore. So I'd love to go to Tuscany and just have some great Italian food.
Yeah, I Italy is one of my favorite countries. And it's tough because, well, people ask, where should I go or what's your favorite place? And I would say, well, my favorite place for what?
There you go.
Because I've been to many countries and I've enjoyed all of them. Some I go back, like Italy is one of my most visited countries I've been to so many times, and I still haven't seen it all. So I need to go back more. But there's different things that I love about different countries. And
You
so when
know,
I work with people, I'm
yeah.
helping people, I always say to them, like, what do you like? What do you need? What are your hobbies, activities, things you like to do, the weather, your spare time? Would you rather learn Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, um, Croatian, like wherever you're living, you're going to have to learn some. Like what
Yeah.
works for you? Because what works
Yeah.
for me and the lifestyle that I have is okay for me. And many people would not want the lifestyle that I have or the one that I'm striving to have. They say, I want to move, I want to be there, stay there. Where I'm thinking, like, I want a place in 3 or 4 countries. I don't know if I'll ever
Yeah.
get it, but that's my perfect. And spending 3 to 4 months in each place and visiting and having friends and things like that. But some people think that's just too much moving around. And it's a lot. I get it, and that's what I want. What I think I want right now. You never know. In 20 years, I could think, oh, forget it. That is way too much moving around.
Well, I'm quite a bit older than you, so I certainly would understand why someone would say, I don't want to be moving around that much. But when I was younger, I wanted the similar things. I wanted to be able to travel the world, and I did. And when you get older and you're thinking about what did I do, I wouldn't say, maybe I would say sad for people who have not experienced moving to not moving, but going to other places, meeting other
Mhm.
cultures, meeting other people, because it's very
Yeah.
difficult to understand Europe if you haven't been there, you haven't spent enough time there, and more than once
Mhm.
probably, because after the first time you go back and you have a different experience. Often it's even
Right.
better. Uh, so I would say that I do feel sad because very few Americans travel. I mean, what, 4 or 5% of the American public has been to Europe. It's a small percentage. But
That is very sad.
tying all this back to real estate and business and life, I think the thing is that to understand the psychology of people, understand interpersonal communications theory, for example, that concept of self-disclosure and reciprocity. We've all been in situations where someone came up and started disclosing details that we really didn't want to hear.
Yeah.
Maybe they were too personal, too quickly.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
maybe you had a waiter at a restaurant who came over and you asked them how they're doing, and they told you their life story in 3 minutes, and that was all bad. We've all
Yes.
been there. So I think what the key is, and people have always asked me, it's a very important question. What happens when you're talking to someone and they get too personal? Well, the answer is very simple. Don't respond. I don't mean don't talk, but don't reciprocate with a similar disclosure. So if they get
Right. Because then
personal
you're opening the
and
door.
you reciprocate with the personal story, you're tearing away the layers of the onion. Okay. And that's
Hmm.
going to move very quickly to the center of the onion and very personal. So simply
Right.
change the subject by saying, well, what part of town do you live in? Change it
Hmm.
away from what they were headed to. Okay. And that will keep you from going too personal too soon. And I think in business, people need to be very keenly aware of interpersonal communications theory and psychology in dealing with people. And that's why being a people watcher is a great profession because you learn so much.
Oh, yeah. I love sitting on a terrace on a nice sunny day with a glass of wine and just watching people.
And sometimes you see things that you admire, and some things you see things that you detest. But it's all
Yep,
part of the human experience, isn't it?
that's right. And it's to me it's interesting too because then sometimes, I wonder what's going on in their life. How even though I don't hear what's being said or I don't understand the language, but sometimes with the tone or the gesture, the body movement, you wonder because we all go through great times. We have good, happy things, and we all go through tough, rough times. It just reminds me one time I was in Italy and I was at a restaurant and I couldn't see what was going on beside me, but there was a couple and I was there by myself and everything was fine, and over the span of whatever, I'll say 45 minutes or something, it went from they were having a very nice meal, very nice dinner to, "Oh, he just said something he shouldn't have s oh, she is mad, and, oh, I guess they're done." Like, it was I mean, you could I don't know what was said or whatever, but I could just tell that switch of something was said, and
Yeah.
everything just kinda changed
We
from there,
could
and I
we
just
could
thought,
t-
"Oh, that's
we
so
could talk for
interesting."
hours. We could talk for hours, and I'll tell you why. I'll give you a story. I was showing a couple that had gotten a divorce, and the wife was looking for a home. She asked me to
Mhm.
show her their home, and the divorce was coming up that week, and she was trying to figure out where to move to. And as the realtor, I showed up with her at the house and unlocked the door, and we walked in, and she stopped and said, "This is the worst day of my life," and went over and sat down on the sofa and broke out in huge tears.
Oh, no.
Okay. Heartbroken tears.
Mhm.
Now, at that point, if you don't have empathy and you think you're going to do something business wise, forget it.
No.
So when you're in a situation like you described, you have to become human. You have to
Mm.
understand the relationship. Everybody's gone through this where there's an argument between a couple or something. And you have to be very empathetic, and you might say, you know what, I'm gonna go make a quick phone call. I'll be right back. You might excuse yourself and give them a chance to try to work it out and reset. Or you might just sit
Right.
back and be quiet, but you have to be empathetic. And I'm sure that's what you did because you were like, oh no, this is not good. The evening
Yep.
just went down. So I
Yep.
think business is about people. It's about relationships. It's about connecting with
Mhm.
people. And I think that as I've gone on in my life, and I've been very lucky in many, many respects, not everybody's lucky. 8.5 years ago, my wife Judy had a major stroke, and it
Oh,
changed our
no.
lives and it changed our travel. We had plans to do much what you're talking about we had plans to spend 8 to 10 weeks a year in Europe or around the world, and that all
Hmm.
changed overnight
Yeah.
because of a major stroke. And so Judy had to retire from business, and it changed our business model completely because she was an essential part of our business. And so things happen in life that you just have to roll with
Mm.
and not be too down about because you have to function and you have to deal with it. So I would say people
Right.
that
And I
out there
think
in
so
life,
too, sometimes when, when that unexpected, I am always the type though, it's try to find the silver lining. Right. And it may take time, but when something happens or a door closes or an opportunity is no longer there, something else will happen. Something else will come up. It may not be next week. It may not be next month. It might be 1, 2 years down the road. But I always think everything happens for a reason and there has to be some type of silver lining to it. And eventually things will work out the way that they're supposed to.
have you seen the movie Silver Linings Playbook?
No.
Okay, it's Bradley Cooper and can't remember the actress's name now. Okay,
Okay.
these are two severely flawed people. He's bipolar. She's got all kinds of insecurity issues and problems. Okay. Now,
Oh yeah, I
individually,
might. You know what? I might have seen that
yeah.
now that you're starting to
Okay.
talk about it. I
You
think I
said
may
silver
have.
linings, and that's why I brought this up. Uh, he was severely flawed, and she was severely flawed. She had lost her
Mm,
husband, who was a police officer, and got killed in an accident. And together, they were great.
yeah.
But individually, they were severely flawed. Okay. And I think that's a great movie about psychology. It's a great
Mm,
movie about understanding human behavioral and how people together are different than they are individually. Um, so I think in my book, I talk about a great deal about human behavioral theory, a great deal about psychology. I tell stories in my book about the people I've worked with. The gentleman I worked with in Buenos Aires, who was, when I met him, there's a story in the book about him and how I met him. But when I was down at his home, it turned out he was among the super wealthy in the world. I had no idea when I went to Argentina, to Buenos Aires, that he was this kind of a super wealthy person. And when I met his family, it was extremely important to him that I meet his children. He was proud of his
wow.
children. They were teenagers. He was proud of them and he wanted to show them off their language skills, their etiquette, everything about them. And it was extremely important to him. Had I denied him that opportunity, it would have been hugely insulting to him. So we have to be keenly aware of what the other person is thinking, what the other person is feeling in everything we do. And when you're in a hurry and when you try to get through something quickly because you have an agenda, a meeting, that's why I'm enjoying this a great deal because I was prepared for a 20 or 30 minute, but I'm having so much fun. It's great. Okay. Well, when people go into business and they stack appointments against each other and they don't leave time for the human element, they don't leave
Mm,
time for what could happen if they weren't in a hurry. And I
right.
think one of the key about business is don't get in a hurry with people that you're talking to because it's all about them. It's not about you. It's very little about you. I
Mm,
never sell homes. I don't sign leases. I don't do contracts. I help people solve problems. And their problem could be
yeah.
anything from I need to have a new home in a new area and move my family, or it could be I'm going through a very difficult time in my life and I have to have empathy and understanding what they're going through. So don't get
Right.
into how much I'm not into transactions, I'm into people.
Hmm.
And transactions are a beginning and an end. With
Right.
people, it's a continuous evolution of life and personality and communications.
Hmm.
I think one of
And
the things I would tell people is don't be such a hurry. That's one of the things I love about Europe is
yes.
hardly anybody's in a hurry.
No. And I think people also sense it when they feel like they're just a transaction.
For sure. Yeah.
Right. And nobody because nobody likes to be sold. Nobody likes that feeling. It's like, oh, you don't really care. I'm just a dollar amount to you, or you just sold. It's like, the sleazy salesperson. And
Yeah.
it's just nobody wants to deal with anybody like that. And people want to, as you said, deal with people they know, they like, and they want to feel important. Everybody wants to feel important.
Well, I have one other cue for people, if it would be helpful. Picture a ballroom in a wonderful hotel,
Mhm,
and there's 399 people in this ballroom,
mhm.
and they all have salesperson stamped on their foreheads, and they're all dressed
Okay.
in gray clothing, and they all have the same expression on their face, which is, "Can I find a prospect?" Okay.
Right.
And one person walks in who has a blue suit on, and across their head is written, "I care about you." And they're not in a hurry to sell anything. They're not in a hurry to pitch, tell their story. They're there to meet people, like people, and connect. That's a story about differentiation. Now, in your life, if you cannot differentiate yourself from others, you're going to have a tough time. And in sales and in business, if you cannot differentiate yourself from your competition, there are thousands of real estate agents in Dallas, Texas. How do you differentiate yourself from those others? And so I think another key concept in my book and in understanding psychology is you have to allow people to get to know you, and you have to be able to differentiate yourself from the average, from the norm, whatever the case might be.
Right. I agree completely. And Sonny, I want to thank you for your time. But before we wrap up, you had mentioned your book a few times. What is the title of your book? Tell us a little bit about it and where people can get it.
Well, thank you. And I want people to know that I'm not here to sell books.
No.
I want to help people. It took two
Hmm.
years to write the book, and the book itself is uh, this is the book. It's a hardback. It is available in EPUB. So from anyone all over the world, they can get it very affordably. But I wrote the book, The Psychology and Art of the Real Estate Profession. The Architecture of the Real Estate Practice is the title. But it's about psychology, interpersonal communications, people, and real estate. And it's a textbook, not a typical book about telling you how great I am and how much money I made. It's a textbook about how to communicate with people, how to relate to people, how to be empathetic, how to build relationships that will last for years and years and will allow you to build a business. In this particular instance, it's real estate, but it applies to almost all professional services
Oh,
companies.
yeah,
Build a
I'm sure.
business with clients and people. A lot of people think you go into real estate and you're going to have hundreds of people and you're going to sell hundreds of homes to hundreds of different people who have no relationship with each other. And reality is that you could probably take 25 people over a period of 10 years that would represent 50, 60% of your total income.
Right.
Because it's relationships, people who want to do business with you. So the book is available on my website at realestatebook.org. It's also available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and other places. You can just query the Google to find that. Architecture of the Real Estate Practice by Sonny R. Moyers. On my website, only on my website, realestatebook.org, is the EPUB available. And it's under $20, so it's affordable for people to buy. And it's 300 pages and complex. It's not an easy read book. It's more of a Malcolm Gladwell book. In
Okay,
fact, it was
good.
patterned after some of his writings because
Mhm.
it's a complex book. One of the things I'll share with you, Sally, is when I got into this book, writing the book, everybody told me to write a book to the eighth grade education level. I didn't do that. This book is for someone who's a deep thinker. It's not for someone who wants to read a book in one night. It's not a quick read, and it's not about selling things and making money. It's about solving problems and helping people.
I think that's great. And I'll put the link in the show notes
Yeah.
for people who are interested in it. I'm definitely going to be getting a copy of it. I'm very
Great.
interested in it. And because I'm interested in psychology, I mean, it's just why do we do what we do? Why do we think the way we think? And if we can figure some of those things out, it can help us individually and personally. Like sometimes when I catch myself thinking stuff or kind of going down the negative rabbit hole,
Right.
which with all the stuff that's going on in the world, it's kind of easy to do. And it's saying, stop. Why am I thinking this? No, I need to
Yeah.
change my thoughts. I need to change my emotions. I need to do what works for me to change those things. And people just, we need to learn those things about ourselves. And when we can understand ourselves better and understand other people better, we then have more empathy, more understanding, and we can deal with things better. And I think it just makes the world better. It makes, even though I'm not going to be changing the world, but individually, it makes our own
Who
community
knows? You
or
might
group
be.
with us.
You're changing the world a few people at a time, but you're changing the world, Sally. And hopefully
Well,
this interview will help some people. As I've gotten to a point in my life where I'm older and I'm not no longer striving to achieve these heights of success, I found that it's very nice to spend time trying to say, a great woman that I worked for, and her name was Evie Halliday. She was a real estate agent in Dallas, Texas. She owned a big brokerage firm that I was a part of. Every Halliday said, do something good for someone every day. And when you start doing
yeah,
that, it's amazing how much love and enjoyment you get in life when you try to help people. So hopefully I've been able to help people today in some way, small way, to understand better and try to do better in communicating and the psychology and even in the real estate arena.
absolutely. Well, you've definitely given me some things as we were talking. I'm like, oh, I need to work on that. Oh, I need to do that. So it's definitely for myself have definitely some things that I need to work on. So again, Sonny, thank you very much for your time
Thank you.
today.